Greg Stamper is an interfaith and New Thought minister. He is one of the brightest, freshest, most vital voices on the New Thought scene today. Greg, thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon.
You're welcome. I'm so happy to be here.
Let me ask you first and foremost about where you came from.
Okay.
Your background is in the Pentecostal church.
Absolutely.
And you come from a long line of Pentecostal ministers, some of them quite pioneering.
Yes.
Tell me about how far back your family goes in Pentecostalism.
Yeah, well, I'm a fourth generation minister. Grew up in the Pentecostal church. My dad was a pastor and a minister. Also, you know, uncles, other family members, but more importantly, my great-grandmother was also a pastor, founded a church at a time within the Pentecostal movement. Women being ministers was actually frowned upon. And so for her to be able to do that was incredibly pioneering. She went on to thrive and help so many people, and that's something that's always stuck with me. So I kind of always felt and knew that in some way, shape, or form, I would be a minister. I didn't know what that would look like. If you had asked me as a child if it would look like what I'm doing today, probably not. But there was always that underlying sense of wanting to do something to serve humanity, help humanity, and really push spirituality in some way. I get to do it through New Thought now, which is very cool.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I think is misunderstood about Pentecostalism is that as a religious movement, it helped reintroduce a sense of the wondrous and the miraculous to 20th century spirituality, very similar to New Thought.
Absolutely.
Tell me about
that.
And
I love this. So I think this is great because for me, I think that's what helped to make my leap. While there were some things I had to let go of, there were so many things that were incredibly familiar. And so, yes, I think within New Thought, what I love when I look at the founders of New Thought, there was the healing. Healings is a foundational part of New Thought when we look at the founders with tuberculosis, things that were considered incurable at that time. These things were being healed using the power of mind, using an understanding that our oneness with God, using an understanding that if we heal our minds, we can heal our lives. That was familiar to me because that's what I had seen and you know, through growing up in the church, seeing my father pray for folks and they be healed. But now I understand that it was the power of their own mind, the power of their own belief in what was possible that was actually bringing forth the healing, not some external force outside of them that was bringing that healing.
And how do you understand the healing dimension of New Thought today in the 21st century? How does it relate to mainstream medicine? What have been your experiences with it?
Well, for me, what's interesting, we live in such a great time because I think science and spirituality are coming closer and closer and closer together. So now it's not uncommon for a physician to acknowledge that the mindset of a patient actually matters in terms of even if they choose to go through traditional medicine, say it was a cancer patient that decided to go through chemotherapy, their mindset, what they're choosing to do, how they're approaching this situation, this diagnosis on a day-to-day basis makes the difference between someone who has just taken on a mindset of, oh no, all is lost and it's all over for me. We have evidence of those things now. So I think what's beautiful within New Thought, we get to reinforce that and support, and we have been able to do that even in our center, support members of our community and congregation who may be dealing with an illness, but support them in holding the highest thought, the highest possibility, holding and not just being positive thinking, but actually believing and knowing that they can heal. And it's bringing those two things together, I think, is ultimately what helps them heal, but also where the benefit of New Thought is.
Greg, I wanted to talk to you about your transition from the Pentecostal tradition that you grew up in to New Thought.
Okay.
Now, following in the footsteps of your family, you could have become a liberal evangelical minister.
True.
You could have become an independent Pentecostal minister, but you went toward the metaphysical.
Absolutely.
How did you come to New Thought?
Well, first, you know, I entered seminary in 2000. I went to New York Theological Seminary, which is a liberal seminary. So that was a choice to even sort of step away a little bit from what was familiar to me. But once I got into seminary, I realized that I needed to unlearn a lot. The positions that I held theologically, what I believed to be true and how I saw the Bible at that time, I was challenged. And I had to make a choice. Would I run to the familiar, or would I stay open and develop a beginner's mind and realize that I don't know it all? And really, I think this is what seminary is supposed to do, right? Seminary is not designed to give us to tell us how to think or give us a specific theological position, but to give us tools that then we can, through that time, develop our own theological position. And so what happened for me, as things began to shift for me, it took me to ask a question. I became very curious and said, well, if the Bible, if I'm seeing and reading the Bible differently and even hearing the words of Jesus differently, what about other faiths? And it immediately took me to Buddhism. And what was beautiful about that is I say Jesus and Buddha are first cousins. I read the words of Buddha, and it was as if I had read those words my entire life. They were so familiar to me. And through that familiarity, then it took me to, in high school and college, I studied Joseph Campbell. And so it took me to understanding comparative religion and mythology, and how there's this underlying story and these underlying truths that come from all different cultures. And we can look at other creation stories. We can look at other flood stories. We can look at other stories of dying and resurrecting God-men. And so it completely transformed everything that I ever thought, which meant that ultimately I had to leave what I knew as the church. And that was about 7 years. I did a lot of deep study, and it moved me to the metaphysical path. It was interesting because I didn't have a word really for it. Obviously, I knew it was metaphysics, but I did not know that there was a movement. I was not yet aware of the entire movement and history of New Thought until I was made aware of Michael Beckwith. And through that was the first time that I heard the words New Thought. And then things began to make sense for me, because I could bring all of the good from my Pentecostal upbringing, and now all of my study, secular study, right, as well as my spiritual study, my metaphysical study, all of it could come together. I can be a lover of science, and that's okay. All of it was beautiful, and so that's how I came to New Thought, and I'm completely home, because it lets me embrace all of myself.
Now, you used a very interesting phrase, which is beginner's mind, a phrase that's associated with Buddhism. And I wanted to ask you a very practical question about that. I'm often very touched by people who tell me about their experience of coming to New Thought. Sometimes they discover a particular book, a book by Ernest Holmes, or a book by Neville, or a figure like Michael Beckwith, who just flicks on the light for them, and they feel this flood of enthusiasm and realization and vividness. How do we retain that? How do we keep the beginner's mind? Because that's always an issue in one's practice.
It's the daily choice. It's more, one thing I think it is just a daily choice. I wake up every day and ask myself, what is one thing I can learn today? So I think that can be helpful. And then also I think it's about challenging ourselves to do different things. So often, no matter who we are, no matter where we are, we all have a routine. It's interesting, and this is something that I've been doing recently. I just, whatever location I'm walking to, if I'm walking to the subway, our local subway stop, I walk in a different direction. I take a different street because everything changes. I'm going to see something different. I'm going to hear something different. I'm going to experience life different, even though I'm going to the same space, the same place. Little things like that are what help me to kind of always realize that I don't know everything, that I can see something different and see life differently, even my own neighborhood. Just instead of walking the normal routine, I really generally walk the same way, but at least once a week, I'll just take a different street, just turn a different corner, even if it's a longer way. It puts me in the place of knowing that there's something more, that there's a way to see life differently. So those are little things I think we can do, but more than anything, it's just about the daily choice. And I think as we prove that in our life, then that brings the willingness for us to want to choose that again and again. Life is infinite. There's so much to know. There's so much to learn. So we can always adopt that beginner's mind. For me this year, it's been about improving my Spanish. Right? So every year there's some larger thing that's about what can I learn? What don't I know? And how can I dig deeper into it?
Now, you had told me in conversation that when you came to New Thought as a seeker, as a theology student, you discovered that you had actually already learned this philosophy from your father when you were a very little kid. Tell me about that episode.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Well, I was, it was the summer just before I started high school. And I'll never forget it because it's kind of a pivotal age as a young man. And that summer, my dad sat me down. I didn't know what he was going to tell me. I thought maybe I was in trouble. He said, there's something I want to tell you. He said, I may not be able to ever give you millions of dollars, but I can tell you this, and with this information, if you want to be wealthy, you can be wealthy, but more than anything, you'll be able to succeed in your life. And what he began to share with me was the power of mind. He began to share with me that we have this power of thought, that we can hold an idea in mind and that thing can outpicture in our lives. That he also said that the people that we look up to, celebrities, he named people like Oprah Winfrey and even Bill Cosby at the time, that they understand these principles, that they've exercised these principles. And you know, I can remember that Think and Grow Rich, I can recall it, seeing it laying around the house. But
that was in the household.
Yeah, that was in the house. I never opened it up. I
Yeah.
didn't, you know, but thinking back now, I'm like, oh wow, it makes sense. And so what I did that summer, I took him at his word. And my birthday is in the summer, and there was a specific bike I wanted. And I did not tell my parents what the make and model was, but I knew exactly what I wanted. I didn't even tell them that I wanted a bike. But I held this picture in mind, and I visualized it. It actually reminds me, I think there's a scene in The Secret of a kid with a bike.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And so I held, I held that idea in my mind, and on my birthday, guess what I received? The exact bike. It was a Mongoose 10-speed that I wanted at the time. I got it. So I'm proving that I can hold an idea in mind, see it, feel the feelings, all of those good things, and I was able to manifest that. Later in the summer, my sister and I, we wanted to take a trip. We were going to take a trip down to North Carolina, but at the time, my parents we had just bought a new house, spending a lot of money, and so they said, oh, you know, we're not really going to be able to take this trip. We know you all want to go, but it's just not feasible right now. So my sister and I, we looked at each other because we're like, we know the principles.
Isn't that something?
So we got together and just held that idea in mind and only talked about it as if it was inevitable fact. We expected it. We knew it was going to happen. And about a week before we were scheduled to go, my dad, he said, I don't know what you two are doing. You know, and it was kind of an approving smile. And he said, but everything has changed. We're taking the trip. And we got to take the trip.
Isn't that something?
Yep.
Now, I'm glad you brought up The Secret, because as you and I have also discussed, I think there's been this excessive amount of criticism directed toward The Secret.
Absolutely.
I've had my criticisms of Rhonda Byrne, and I've written about them, and I have my differences. But I rewatched the movie very recently with one of my kids, my 10-year-old son, Toby, and I discovered that I really liked the values of the movie. I didn't find them excessively material or acquisitive. I found them very promoting of joy and a sense of selfhood.
Absolutely.
What's been your experience of the movie? Because I think we need to look at this movie. It's now 10 years gone by. We need to bring fresh eyes to it.
I agree. I think The Secret is still an awesome entry point. I celebrate it for that as an awesome entry point to bring people to this awareness. For sometimes I think we get so caught up, particularly we can get caught up in metaphysics and new thought, thinking that, oh, everybody knows this. Right?
Yeah.
And so everybody doesn't know this.
Right.
So The Secret is a beautiful entry point, and it brings, as we talk about the story of a kid with a bike, it brings familiar ideas and things that people want to experience, or whether it's in romantic relationships or business, or going back even to physical healing, right? Understanding that we have the power to impact our lives, and more importantly, I think it inspires some hope, because it says we're not victims to the circumstances of life. And so for that reason, I think that's why The Secret has been so popular, and I think it'll continue to be.
Yes,
It'll
it's
continue to be.
interesting. I've heard so many people on social media criticizing The Secret over the past few years
Yeah.
that I thought to myself, this is almost taking on a rehearsed quality.
Yep.
And I decided to go back to it with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And what I found was
Yeah.
very unlike what is often depicted in the
Right,
criticism.
I agree. I agree. And again, we have to treat it as an entry point.
Yeah.
It is not, you know, the full volume of metaphysics
Yeah.
or New Thought teachings. I don't think it was ever designed to be that. But it is a great entry point and even a great reminder. I would
Yes.
say, you know, as you talk about rewatching, I'm going to rewatch it as well because it's a great reminder of just what we hold to be true and that it works.
Yes. Speaking of entry points, there are times I have this fantasy where I almost wish I could erase my memory banks of everything that I've learned about metaphysics and spirituality and have the experience of rediscovering a beautiful, simple book like this thing called You or a movie like The Secret. And I ask myself, what would it be like to rewind and just go back to the very beginning?
Yeah,
because
that
it's
would be
such a
amazing.
powerful experience.
It is. It is. Yeah.
Now, another thing that you and I share in common is a love for comic books and
Absolutely.
superhero movies and
Yes,
so forth
yes,
and so on.
yes, yeah.
And there is something truly magical in the whole superhero mythos because in addition to being exciting and adventurous, it's whispering to us in some way that there's something more, there's something more.
Something more.
What's been your experience as a spiritual seeker of
man.
that world?
It's the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, I look for the hero's journey, whether it's, you know, coming from Star Wars all the way up to the Marvel movies and the DC comic movies. That process that I think in some ways we even go through a journey, a hero's journey every 24 hours. But then at the same time, within our lifetime, we're moving through different cycles. And so we get to experience that visually by watching these characters. We get to experience what it feels like to go down to the depths, having to unlearn. Right? Sometimes, you know, the character, you leave home. You have to leave what's familiar, as I had to do when I went into seminary. But knowing and trusting that you will come out of this and you come out differently, you come out victorious, you come out with a new sense of purpose. And of course, you know, there's some victory at the end. We get to see that over and over again. That's why I love Captain America or Iron Man or all of, you know, these movies, Spider-Man. That trajectory is always there. I think we were talking about it. One of my favorite things is the sequel. Every second movie has to deal with this dichotomy between being a hero and also being human.
Yes.
Which is kind of what we do. Even as we embrace metaphysics, we still have this understanding of our humanness while we're also told that we're powerful. And, you know, that's depicted in the second Superman movie, Christopher Reeve.
Right, the original.
The original, right?
Yeah.
Where he's choosing between, okay, I want to be in this relationship with Lois Lane and I'm willing to give up my powers to be with her, but then the rest of the world is suffering because of that choice that he made. We see the same thing in Spider-Man where he does that with MJ. And so I love how that just depicts how we're always still navigating our humanness and our spiritual selves as well, right? And making those micro choices on a daily basis of sort of which voice do you listen to, if you will, you know? Yeah.
Now, as a pastor and as a seeker, have you ever been through what might be called a crisis of faith, where you said to yourself, maybe I'm wrong about all this. Maybe, you know, the world that I've thought existed, that I've learned about in metaphysics is not what it seems to be. I mean, have you ever bottomed out?
Absolutely,
in a sense?
absolutely. It's interesting. This was before founding Celebration Spiritual Center. A good friend of mine had transitioned. He was 33. A good friend from college, and we have a group of friends. You know, we're all very, very close, and that was tough. And I was driving down to Maryland for his funeral, which would be the next day, and then was also really feeling that what I was starting to feel and see, even within the metaphysical and the New Thought path, was two very distinct paths. You know, sometimes we can be criticized for talking too much about prosperity, right? And there's some teachers that's really their focus. And then there was sort of the path of oneness and unity and harmony, and I felt at that moment that I was being asked to make a choice, and I didn't really know which way to go. And at that point, I was like, maybe all of this is just a bunch of BS. Right? Maybe I just need to let go of this whole thing. And particularly when you're in the midst of grieving and you're seeing, someone so young, he dealt with a long illness. And so I went back to actually what had helped me get to the point that I was at that time. I actually used visioning process where I'm asking my higher self, what is God's idea of itself as my life? And that's actually where I got the first inkling of there would be a community that I would actually give birth to and co-found. It came out of that. And that's actually, again, hero's journey, right? It's like going in the depths, you actually find the gold. There's something new that you find that you weren't expecting. And God knows I wouldn't have orchestrated it in that way.
Isn't that
but
something?
out of that, I found that seed that then gave the spark to ultimately and it was about maybe 5 years later, ultimately what created CSC.
And your friend passed on at 33.
Yeah.
I have 33 tattooed on my arm as it happens.
Powerful number.
Yeah,
Powerful number.
yeah, very interesting. Now, I was on the website of your church, the Celebration Spiritual Center in Brooklyn, of which you are a co-pastor, and I was very touched to see the list of sacred books that are venerated in your church, one of which is one of my favorite books, the Kabbalion.
Oh, me too.
Which is an extraordinary New Thought work, which was originally published in 1908.
Yes.
And it digests and amalgamizes the spiritual principles of Hermeticism, the ancient Greek, Egyptian philosophy. Now, it's funny because I read the Kabbalion several years ago, and I just thought, oh, it's just this occult novelty that was published in the early 20th century. And this past summer, I revisited the book. Again, we're talking a lot about revisiting things. I read the book 5 times, back to back, this past summer, and it just opened up everything for me. And I felt like I was in front of such an epic, beautiful spiritual psychology. Tell me about that book, what it does for you, why it became so important.
For me, the Kabbalion, it is a foundational text for me on a personal level.
Yes.
In addition to at CSC. And the reason being because the 7 principles, what it helps me to do, it's the lens that helps me understand everything else. So even as I understand other teachers, there's often conversations, oh, well, how many universal laws are there really? Some will say 3, some will say 11, some will say 13.
Right.
And within these 7 principles of the Kabbalion, all of the other laws come out of. The way I like to think about it is if we think of our human body, I am one body, right? But I could actually spend the rest of my life just investigating my brain.
Yes.
I could spend the rest of my life just investigating the right side of my brain, right? And so the reason why some say there are 11, 12, or even 20 different laws is because they're talking about this one body, really one law, that's expressed as many. And so to understand those laws, ultimately, that's what the Kabbalion helps me do. When we start with the principle of mentalism, all is mind, the universe is mental, right? Understanding that thought creates everything. That's the foundation of it all. We were a thought. I say that we are God's good idea, right? We're all a thought. That is incredibly helpful. And then understanding and navigating the principle of cause and effect. Even when you don't always understand the cause, we might not see it. It happens on different levels. And then even the principle of correspondence, as I just talked about this idea of our body, using that as a correspondence to understand this larger spiritual idea. They just inform the way I think, and then also they help me to dissect spiritual problems. Many times I get many questions and emails. Well, what about, how do I reconcile wanting to be wealthy and being spiritual? Yeah. I'll go to one of my 7 principles, right, to look at and understand the principle of cause and effect. I had a question in a class that we teach on Thursdays around prosperity and really not feeling like it's spiritual and looking at capitalism and different things on the planet. But I go to the principle of cause and effect. And I say, fear is the cause of greed. Right? Money is not the cause of greed. Wealth is not the cause of greed.
Beautifully put.
But it was understanding that principle of causation as taught in the Kabbalion that helps me get there. And that's why I love the Kabbalion.
Beautifully put. I feel as though questions of health and prosperity were at the foundation of modern New Thought.
Absolutely.
And we shouldn't be too quick to move away from those things.
No,
you know,
right,
sometimes
right.
we almost get embarrassed and we think that it's not spiritual to talk about
right.
attainment, to
Right.
talk about personal expansion, acquisitiveness. But if it's part of the human experience, it must be sacred.
Exactly. I agree. I agree. Yeah.
You've also mentioned that the Abraham teachings are meaningful
Yes.
to you. Tell me about that. What was your
Yeah.
entry point to that? What have you found in
Yeah.
those teachings?
Well, you know, the thing I love about Abraham, I do think in terms of specifically talking about the law of attraction, I think Abraham is the best entry point to fully understand the law of attraction. Because of course, right, we understand thought creates things. And as a child, I could hold a thought and you know, manifest a bike, right? But how do you get into what I want to create a certain type of business, or I want to attract a certain type of lover or romantic relationship. And I think then you have to start to, you know, dig a little deeper into understanding the principles, understanding that many times we hear with affirmations, yo, just affirm and you'll have it, right? And people affirm till they turn blue and nothing shows up.
Right.
And so then understanding that actually everything has a vibratory component. For me as a musician, I love that idea to think about vibration, right? And so knowing that everything has a vibratory component, we recognize then that by vibrating, what that event or experience will feel like, right? If you recognize that it's joy that you're after, well, you can be in joy right now. And then actually that frequency harmonizes with everything else that is joyful. You know, Abraham talks about the vortex, this invisible place where everything is, right? The idea is that, right, everything already exists in the non-physical, in mind, and so we're simply aligning through our vibration, using our emotions to do that. I love those teachings through Abraham, thinking about the emotional scale and how our emotions are our teachers and helpful. There's no such thing as a bad emotion. To me, that's good news. You know, sometimes even again, being spiritual, oh, I'm not supposed to be angry. Anger is an indicator. The issue is we shouldn't act in anger, right? If we act in anger, it's destructive. If we use anger to pay attention, it's now constructive, right? Yeah, and I think that's important. So I get those things from Abraham.
Now, another book that's sacred to your congregation and to you is A
Yes.
Course in Miracles.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is a very hot question for me because I'm one of these people who has had 2 incomplete starts with Course in Miracles,
yes.
and I'm sure I'll come back to it again.
Yeah.
But on one hand, we talk about the sacredness of attraction, the
Yeah.
sacredness of the human experience and of our development in this world as we find it. But the Course seems to be asking us to let go of everything, to just release every expectation,
Right.
every sense that we have to draw things unto us.
Right.
And it could be very difficult for people like me who frankly are very goal-oriented and very oriented towards outcome.
Gotcha.
And I think it's been very
Gotcha.
difficult for
That
me.
makes
Talk to
sense.
me about how the Course fits in with this.
Okay, this is good. Well, I think first, yes, most people, Marianne Williamson talks about her early experiences. Everybody puts it down.
Yeah.
You know, the stop and start is part of the process.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's important to understand with A Course in Miracles is that it's teaching a thought system. And I don't know if that's always sort of put out there in front, but it's teaching a thought system. And so the thought system is either the thought system of fear or the thought system of love. And so actually, in terms of goals, it's the thought system of love that really becomes our goal. And when we adopt that thought system, then we use that to attract the things that we want in our life. That then becomes inevitable, is sort of what the Course would teach us. But the thing I love about A Course in Miracles is helping to understand how our minds work in another way. In the early lessons where it says, you know, nothing that I see in this room, on this street, means anything, right? But later it teaches us that we have given everything the meaning that it has, giving us this power back that I'm only upset, you know, you could throw something at me. I'm only upset because of the meaning that I've placed on the event. The event has no power. And so then we're getting to embrace this enormous power that we have as human beings to actually give things meaning that support us or give things meaning that work against us. And so this has even been helpful for me as I help to navigate our congregation through even the political climate, things that are going on for myself as an African American, looking at you know, the killing of unarmed black men. You know, how do you wrestle with these large questions? And so first and foremost, we have to look at what meaning are we placing on the event first, because that's creating an emotion within us. And we recognize that it's kind of taking us back to Abraham, but this idea of we have to vibrate at the emotional level that is equal to what we want versus what we don't want. And so understanding that we have the power to do that even in the midst of something that we all agree is wrong and unwanted. However, then we have the opportunity to actually shift our focus and decide what meaning do we want to give it. This meaning is then helping to give birth to something new. It's giving birth to the desire, first and foremost, to never have this happen again.
Yes.
And now we put our attention on that.
That's
we will
interesting.
never allow this to happen again, right?
Yes.
And we bring the power of mind that then inspires action. I want to be very clear on that, right?
Yes.
We're not burying our heads in the sand.
Right. Yours is not a passive ministry.
Exactly, not at all, right?
Right.
It inspires action, but I recognize that it has to start in mind. It has to start within first.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, another area that you and I have in common is a dedication to transcendental meditation,
yes,
which we
yes,
both engaged in
yes,
for years.
yes.
Now, in TM, you receive a mantra, you sit with this mantra twice a day for about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a profoundly relaxing experience. And in addition to a growing volume of scientific research that demonstrates it relieves depression, relieves hypertension, relieves ADD, and so forth, one of the principles found within transcendental meditation is the idea that it also brings us into realization of a unified field from which all things emerge, which really starts to intersect with new thought. Now, my TM practice, although I go into the mantra and I practice it traditionally, the mind is active, and I visualize things, and I feel that this practice of visualization that occurs very naturally to me while I'm sitting in this exquisitely relaxed state, if it's bringing me into contact with a unified field, it's also contributing to what in TM is sometimes referred to as nature support, which intersects with the concept of manifesting as we talk about it in New Thought. Talk to me about how your TM practice and your dedication to New Thought relate to each other.
Wow. Well, we have one of our 7 guiding principles at Celebration is that daily spiritual practice is not an option, right? And part of that practice, I believe, is meditation. So some form of meditation has always been a part of my life for a long time. But coming to TM, what I love about TM is that it's effortless, that it's reliable.
Yes.
I'm guaranteed to have the same experience. I know that I'm going to contact that place every single time. What I love to think about, right, you talk about the idea that we go down to the quietest level of mind, right, and we reach the consciousness, the unified field, and wonderful how quantum physics, all of that comes together. That is the source of all, right? That is the source of every idea. Well, this takes me back to classic Ernest Holmes, right? There was one mind, one power, one presence working in all, through all, and as all, that is in back of and behind all things. That's the place that we have the opportunity to effortlessly reach 20 minutes twice a day. And then through doing that, what happens is, I was listening to a quote, actually it was a recording, I think, of George Harrison speaking about meditation and his experience with TM. And he talks about this idea of basically we have an anchor, that now once we come out in life, we're still anchored to this place. But really, I think it's not just that we're anchored to it, we're now aware of it. Because the truth is, we're all anchored, we're all tethered. That's life itself that's operating through us, but we're not aware of it. When we're not aware of it, then we don't have full access to that power. TM, as we come out with a more of an awareness of it, and we feel our connection to everyone and everything, the force. Right? It's a big canoe, right? It becomes like a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
So for me, it's on a personal level, it's about that connection. It's the thing that helps me maintain that connection so that when I go out in the world, I don't feel alone. When I go out in the world, I feel empowered. And I absolutely feel that I have the support of nature. I feel I have the support of life. And things come easily.
Yes.
Easily, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you are the co-pastor of a vibrant and growing congregation.
Yes.
I want to ask you, when your congregants come to you with questions, with conundrums, with personal issues, are you hearing a common theme behind these issues? Is there a kind of common denominator that you find is emerging from the voices and the needs of the congregants that you work with?
Absolutely. There's a couple different categories. As I talked about the idea of trying to reconcile wealth and spirituality. That's one that comes up a lot.
Yes.
And I think many people even feel guilty for their wealth or their status, and yet wanting to be spiritual. So that comes up. What's been huge, and it's interesting because as when we opened CSC in 2013, that was a few months after Sandy Hook, the shooting, right? And then looking over the years politically, so many things have happened in this country that are affecting so many people. So there's the question of, okay, well, how do I reconcile my spirituality with wanting to go out and protest? Or what is the right thing to do? What is the effective thing to do? And what does New Thought or what does spirituality say when we have neo-Nazis protesting and all of these different things? So that's a big one. And then the other thing that I see is that many people are suffering with depression, anxiety, and not wanting to have those experiences, and then asking, okay, well, again, where does my spirituality come into play here? And can I be healed? I think on one level, and of course, it's important that I say and always say that seek the help of your physician. And along with that, healing is still possible. Healing is real. Let's not be afraid of that, right? Let's let's not just be excited about money. Let's be excited about thriving in our life, in our body.
Yes.
And of course, wonderfully through the research with TM and even in just general medical research, we're seeing how the power of mind plays this awesome role. And so what we're seeing even within our community is that as people come to understand that they're no longer victims of their circumstances, that here you have keys to transform your life through the power of your thought, and that takes some work. There's things that we have to unlearn. There's forgiveness that we may have to do. All of these things, but the way lives are transforming, it's my joy. Because I just get to be the witness. I don't have the power. Right? I just get to be the witness and say, hey, you have power, and I'm happy to support you in the journey of taking your power and embracing it and using it, and we're watching lives being changed.
Now, Greg, the name of this show is One Simple Idea. So in closing, is there one simple idea that you can leave our viewers that they can experiment with, that they can try, that they can work with in their lives?
Yeah. I was thinking about this earlier today, and the one idea I think that's helpful right now is to say that God agrees with you. And what do I mean by that? Now, God is a placeholder. The universe, source, whatever word feels, it agrees with you. We are the ones that actually hold the power. Sometimes we think that it's the universe is all powerful. Oh, the universe gave this to me. No, the universe just agreed with you. The reason, whatever it is that we've manifested or we have, it's because we actually believed that we could have it. We believed that it was possible. And the universe said yes and amen. It is so. Why I love that is it takes out all the guesswork. Oh, well, can I be this thing? Or can I get this degree? Or am I really worth having this home? Or can I really be in that kind of relationship? God agrees with you. All we have to do is believe that we're worthy of it, because we are by nature. The fact that we exist, that's our worthiness, that's our pre-approval. But God always agrees with us. It works both ways though, right? So if I think I'm undeserving, God agrees with me. And so then I create and manifest undeserving experiences. But again, I think what I love about that is it removes the middleman. It gives us the power. What am I deciding for my life that I want to see, that I want to be, I want to do, I want to have? Because I already know the universe agrees with me, and it will bend over backwards to organize and align life for me to have that experience.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
God agrees with you.
Yes, yes.
Wow. Greg, thank you so much.
Thank
This
you,
has
man.
been a
is
great pleasure.
Great,
Thank
great.
you.
Of course, of course.
We'll have to have you back.
Oh, that would be fun. I look
Thank you.
forward to it. Yeah.